They mocked her shaky salute, a quiet, biting ridicule that traveled on the superheated air of the Al-Dafra logistics hub. To them, she was just Master Sergeant Vance, a woman whose crisp uniform and rigid posture were betrayed by the fine, uncontrollable tremor in her right hand. The first time it happened, a young lieutenant, barely old enough to shave, had returned her salute with a flicker of confusion and pity in his eyes. The whispers started then, slithering through the barracks and chow halls. Damaged goods, nerve shot, pity assignment. She was a ghost assigned to a graveyard of spare parts and forgotten equipment, a place where careers went to die. Colonel Madsen, a man who measured the world in clean lines and unwavering obedience, saw her as a flaw in his perfectly organized system. He believed the tremor was a sign of weakness, a crack in the military bearing he held sacrosanct. He didn't know that the tremor was a map of a past he couldn't comprehend, its epicenter a mission whose details were buried under layers of black ink in a file he would never be cleared to read. He saw a liability. He had no idea he was looking at a legend. But the desert has a way of stripping away pretenses, and a storm was coming, one that would test more than just the base's physical defenses. It would test their very definition of strength, and by the time it passed, the only thing that would be shaking was their certainty about the quiet Master Sergeant in Warehouse 7. Part 1. Arrival. The C-130's ramp lowered with a hydraulic groan, vomiting a wave of heat that felt like a physical blow. Master Sergeant Ilara Vance descended into the furnace of the Arabian Peninsula, her boots crunching on tarmac that shimmered with mirages. The air was thick with the smells of jet fuel, hot metal, and fine, pervasive dust that coated the back of the throat. Al-Dafra Air Base wasn't a frontline posting. It was a sprawling, orderly city of logistics, the circulatory system that kept the war effort's heart beating. It was a place of routine, of predictability. It was, for her, a cage. She carried a single duffel bag, everything she owned packed with the brutal efficiency of a life spent in perpetual motion. Her uniform was immaculate, the creases in her ABU trousers sharp enough to cut. She walked with a measured, ground-eating stride that spoke of years of disciplined movement, her back a steel rod. Only the slightest tremor in her right hand, a subtle, high-frequency vibration, betrayed the perfect stillness of her carriage. Most wouldn't notice it unless they were looking for it. At a place like this, people were always looking. Her check-in at base operations was perfunctory. A young airman first class, his face a mask of bored professionalism, processed her paperwork without looking up. He slid a folder across the counter. Report to Colonel Madsen, 380th Expeditionary Logistics Readiness Squadron. He's in Building 404. He's your new CO. Thank you, Airman, Vance said. Her voice was low and even, devoid of inflection. As she turned to leave, a young second lieutenant with a fresh haircut and an unearned air of authority stepped into her path. Master Sergeant, he said, his tone a little too loud, a little too eager to establish his rank. Vance stopped. She faced him, her eyes, a pale, observant gray, meeting his. She squared her shoulders and brought her right hand up to her brow in a salute. The movement was precise, the angle perfect, but the tremor was there. It was a slight flutter of her fingertips against the brim of her patrol cap, a visible oscillation that seemed to condemn the gesture's intent. The lieutenant's eyes darted to her hand. A flicker of something, surprise, then a poorly concealed smirk, crossed his face. He returned a sloppy, almost dismissive salute. Carry on, Sergeant. Vance dropped her hand to her side, her expression unchanged. She gave a curt nod and walked out of the building, the heat and the lieutenant's silent judgment following her. She could already feel the story taking root, the seeds of gossip planted in the fertile soil of boredom and military hierarchy. Did you see her? The new Master Sergeant? Shakes like a leaf. She didn't need to hear the words to know they were being spoken. She had learned long ago that the quietest battles were often fought against the assumptions of others. Her war had followed her from the shadows into the blinding desert sun, and the first shot had just been fired. Part 2. Dismissal. Colonel Madsen's office was an oasis of climate-controlled order in the swirling chaos of the base. The air was crisp, the desk was clear, and the awards on his wall were perfectly aligned. He was a man who believed in systems, in regulations, in the unambiguous clarity of the chain of command. Ambiguity was a weakness, and Master Sergeant Alara Vance, sitting ramrod straight in the chair before him, was the very definition of ambiguity. He held her personnel file in his hands. It was offensively thin. Her name, rank, and serial number were there. Her basic training records, and then pages upon pages of solid black bars. Redacted. Top secret. Need to know. The last entry before her transfer to his command was a single, unhelpful line, reassigned from special duties due to medical review. Madsen tossed the folder onto his desk. The sound was a sharp slap in the quiet room. He steepled his fingers and stared at her, his eyes cold and analytical. He was a logistician. He assessed assets and liabilities. He let his gaze drift pointedly to her right hand, which rested perfectly still on her knee. The tremor was dormant for now, but he had received the report from the lieutenant at base ops. Master Sergeant Vance, he began, his voice flat. Your file is sparse. Yes, sir, she replied. Her tone was neutral, a polished stone that offered no purchase. It tells me nothing about what you've done for the past 12 years, but it tells me everything I need to know about your future. You've been assigned to my squadron. This is a logistics command. We move parts, we track supplies, we ensure the warfighters have what they need. Our mission relies on precision, attention to detail, and reliability. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. There is no room for error. No room for liabilities. The insult was clear, sharp as a bayonet. He was calling her broken. He was telling her she was a charity case, foisted upon his pristine command by some faceless bureaucracy. Vance's expression remained impassive. She had faced men with knives and bombs, men whose eyes held the promise of imminent death. A colonel's condescension was less than nothing. I understand, sir, she said. His eyes narrowed, searching for a flicker of defiance, of resentment. He found none. It was like talking to a brick wall. Good. You'll be assigned to Warehouse 7. Inventory management. You'll be responsible for cataloging and organizing our long-term storage components. It's a quiet job. You'll work alone. It should be manageable for you. The assignment was a calculated slight. Warehouse 7 was the boneyard, a dusty tomb for obsolete parts and forgotten machinery. It was where you sent people you wanted to forget. It was an administrative exile. Understood, sir, Vance said again, her voice the same unwavering monotone. Your NCOIC will be Master Sergeant Gunner. He'll get you squared away. That will be all. Dismissed. Vance stood. She came to the position of attention. She saluted. This time, the tremor was undeniable, a visible vibration born of the tension in the room. Madsen's return salute was curt, his disgust palpable. She executed a perfect about-face and walked out of the office, leaving the colonel stewing in his certainty. He had assessed the asset and found it wanting. He had filed her away in the darkest corner of his command, confident that he had contained the problem. He had no idea he had just placed his most valuable weapon exactly where it needed to be. Part 3. Observation. Warehouse 7 was a cathedral of forgotten things. Sunlight struggled through grime-caked windows high in the vaulted ceiling, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the stagnant air. It smelled of old oil, decaying cardboard, and time itself. Racks soared 30 feet high, laden with wooden crates and shrink-wrapped pallets, their contents cryptically labeled with faded stencils and serial numbers. To anyone else, it was a purgatory of tedious labor. To Alara Vance, it was a sanctuary. She didn't complain. She didn't question. She simply began. Her ostensible task was inventory, and she performed it with a methodical precision that would have impressed even Colonel Madsen, had he bothered to watch. She moved through the aisles with a clipboard and a scanner, her steps silent on the dusty concrete floor. But she was doing far more than just counting boxes. Her mind, honed by years of operating in hostile environments, was incapable of simple observation. It analyzed. It cataloged. It prepared. While her hands scanned barcodes, her eyes scanned the building's structure. She noted the load-bearing columns, the placement of the fire suppression system, the two roll-up cargo doors, and the single, reinforced personnel exit. She mapped the blind spots in the single security camera's field of view. She saw the warehouse not as a storage space, but as a defensible position. The aisles were firing lanes. The stacks of crates were cover and concealment. A pallet of heavy engine blocks could become a barricade. A forklift could become a battering ram. Her observation extended beyond the warehouse walls. During her mandated breaks, she didn't sit in the air-conditioned break room with the other NCOs, enduring their sideways glances and forced pleasantries. She stood outside, in the oppressive heat, seemingly staring into the shimmering distance. But she wasn't idle. She was watching the base's rhythms. She memorized the patrol schedules of the security force's Humvees. She noted the shift changes for the guards at the main gate. She tracked the flight patterns of the F-22s and the lumbering C-17s, committing their departure and arrival windows to memory. She paid special attention to the perimeter fence. Miles of chain link and concertina wire, bristling with sensors and cameras. A perfect system, according to the daily briefings. But Vance saw something else. On the far western edge, where the terrain dipped into a shallow wadi, the sand had a tendency to drift. After a strong wind, it would pile up against the fence. She watched one afternoon as a maintenance crew came out to clear it. They were lazy, clearing only the most obvious drifts, leaving a section where the sand remained piled high, almost halfway up the fence. Crucially, she noticed that the pressure-sensitive fiber optic cable running along the bottom was likely buried too deep in that section to register a light-footed climber. It was a tiny flaw, an imperfection in Madsen's perfect system, a whisper of a vulnerability. She filed it away, a single critical data point in the vast, silent tactical map she was building in her mind. The other airmen saw a broken master sergeant counting boxes. They saw her staring at nothing. What she was doing was what she had always done. She was reading the terrain. She was learning the battlefield. And she was waiting. Part 4, Pressure. The sky turned yellow first. A sickly, jaundiced hue bled across the horizon, swallowing the brilliant blue of the desert sky. The wind, which had been a constant, sighing presence, picked up a new voice, a low, guttural moan that grew steadily in pitch. The old hands on the base, the ones who had seen it all, glanced to the west and began securing anything that wasn't bolted down. The forecast had called for high winds, nothing more. The forecast was wrong. It came not as a storm, but as a solid wall. 1,000-foot-high tsunami of sand and dust, churning and boiling under its own immense power. The locals called it a hubbub. It hit the base like a physical impact, plunging the afternoon into an apocalyptic twilight. The sun vanished. The world became a maelstrom of roaring wind and stinging, abrasive sand that found its way through every seal and crack. Visibility dropped to 0. Inside the 380th's command center, order dissolved into a low-grade panic. The primary communications tower went down, its signal swallowed by the sheer density of particulate matter in the air. The sophisticated perimeter sensor grid, the base's electronic eyes and ears, began throwing a cascade of false positives as the wind whipped at the fences, before failing altogether in several key sectors. The base was blind and deaf. Colonel Madsen stood in the center of the room, barking orders. "Give me SATCOM. Where's my feed from the aerostat balloon? Someone give me a weather update now." His voice was tight, strained. He was a man whose entire career was built on control, and he was in a situation that was utterly, terrifyingly out of his control. He was managing chaos, reacting to failures, his focus splintered in a dozen different directions. His perfect system was crumbling around him. The storm was more than a weather event. It was a weapon. It was the perfect cover. The howling wind masked the sound of movement. The blinding dust concealed approach. Every soldier on the base felt it, a primal sense of unease that prickled the skin. They were isolated, vulnerable. The pressure mounted with every minute that ticked by, with every crackle of static over the radios that offered no clarity, only more confusion. In Warehouse 7, Alara Vance felt the building groan under the assault of the wind. The lights flickered, then held. She had been in the middle of her inventory when the sky changed. She hadn't rushed for cover. She had simply walked to the main cargo door and looked out through the small, reinforced window, watching the sandwall approach. She felt the drop in barometric pressure in her bones, a familiar precursor to violence. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't even tense. The chaos outside seemed to sharpen her senses, the roar of the wind filtering out all the world's distractions. This was a state she understood. This was an environment she knew how to navigate. The base was blind, but she could see. She could see the vulnerability she had noted days ago, the flaw in the fence on the western perimeter. And in her mind's eye, she could see a small team of men, clad in black, using the storm as their shield, moving silently toward that very spot. The pressure wasn't just building in the command center. It was coalescing on a single, forgotten point on the map. And Vance was standing right in the middle of it. Par 5, intervention. A new sound cut through the storm's roar. It was shrill, electronic, and terrifyingly close. A perimeter breach alarm. It blared for a few seconds from a nearby sector post before being abruptly silenced. In the command center, it was just another blinking red light on a map full of them. But Vance knew what it was. It was the starting gun. Her radio, a small, handheld unit she'd signed out for inventory purposes, crackled to life with panicked, overlapping chatter. Sector Charlie is not responding. Repeat, SF Patrol at Checkpoint Charlie is dark. Visual is 0. We can't see a damn thing. Hostile contact, near Hangar 4. We're taking fire. The attack was exactly where it shouldn't be. Hangar 4 housed the MQ-9 Reapers, the high-value drone assets. The insurgents had bypassed the main defenses, using the storm and the flaw in the fence to slip through undetected. The on-duty security forces were pinned down, disoriented, fighting shadows in a blinding world. Vance didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for orders. Orders were a luxury for a system that was still functioning. She watched the tactical situation unfold in her mind with chilling clarity. She knew the layout of the base better than the men defending it. She knew the enemy's objective. She knew their most likely path of ingress. She didn't reach for a rifle. Her weapon was a radio. Switching the unit to an auxiliary channel, a little-used frequency for maintenance crews, she keyed the mic. Her voice was the antithesis of the chaos erupting around them. It was calm, measured, and radiated an absolute, unshakable authority. To any security forces elements near Hangar 4, this is Master Sergeant Vance in Warehouse 7. I have a visual solution. Acknowledge. A voice, young and panicked, came back through the static. Who is this? We're pinned down behind the fuel depot. It was Airman Chun, a kid she'd seen in the chow hall. Chun, listen to me. The enemy is using the maintenance trench for cover. They are moving to flank you from the east. I need you to lay down suppressing fire on the trench opening, grid Lima Niner. We can't see Lima Niner. You don't have to, Vance replied, her voice unwavering. Trust the coordinates. 200 meters, your 1 o'clock. Fire now. There was a half-second of hesitation. Then the distinct sound of M4 fire erupted over the radio. A scream of surprise, in a language that was not English, followed. She switched her focus. Sergeant Davis, are you on this net? Davis was a burly, competent NCO she'd observed during PT. Here, Sergeant, his voice boomed back. You have 2 men and a forklift in the vehicle depot. Is that correct? Yes, Master Sergeant. How did you know that? Get in the forklift. Go to grid Kilo 7. There's a stack of concrete barriers there. Move them. Block the access road between hangars 3 and 4. You're creating a kill box. Do it now. Vance moved through her warehouse as she spoke, her mind a supercomputer of tactical variables. She wasn't just directing troops. She was reshaping the battlefield with the assets at her disposal. She saw it all. The enemy's advance, the defenders' positions, the terrain. From the dusty confines of Warehouse 7, she was a ghost in the machine, an unseen general conducting a symphony of violence with perfect, deadly precision. She directed one team through a utility tunnel they didn't know existed, bringing them up behind the enemy. She had another use a discarded shipping container for elevated cover. Her commands were simple, direct, and impossible to disobey. They were the words of someone who had seen this 100 times before. For 10 minutes, the battle raged, guided by her disembodied voice. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. All hostile elements neutralized or captured, a breathless voice reported over the net. Area secure. Silence fell, broken only by the mournful howl of the wind. In Warehouse 7, Elara Vance keyed her mic one last time. Good work. Maintain security. Out. She placed the radio down on a crate. She picked up her clipboard. Her right hand trembled as she made a neat check mark next to a part number for AC 5 Galaxy's landing gear assembly. The storm still raged outside, but inside the wire the crisis had passed. Part 6, Shift. In the command center, the fog of war was slowly lifting. The auxiliary channel, which had been broadcasting the calm, precise orchestration of the base's defense, fell silent. The effect was jarring. For 10 minutes, an unknown voice had taken control, cutting through the chaos like a surgeon's scalpel. Now it was gone. Colonel Madsen stared at the tactical map, where the blinking red icons representing the attackers had been extinguished, replaced by the steady blue of friendly forces. His own orders had been reduced to irrelevant noise. He had been a spectator to his own base's defense. "Who was that?" he demanded, his voice raw. He spun to face the communications officer. "Identify that transmission. What was that call sign?" "No call sign, sir," the officer stammered, tapping at his console. The transmission originated from a standard-issue inventory radio. Triangulating the signal, it came from Warehouse 7-inch. Warehouse 7. The boneyard. The administrative exile. Madsen's mind struggled to connect the dots. The only person assigned there was Vance, the broken master sergeant with the shaky salute. It made no sense. It was impossible. He grabbed a jacket and stormed out into the subsiding gale, 2 armed security forces airmen trotting to keep up. The wind was still strong, whipping sand into his face, but its fury was spent. He marched across the compound, his boots crunching on the newly formed drifts of sand, his mind racing. The route he took was littered with the evidence of a fierce firefight: brass casings, scorch marks on concrete, the still forms of neutralized insurgents. He passed the access road between the hangars, now completely blocked by a row of massive concrete barriers that hadn't been there an hour ago. He saw a forklift parked nearby, its engine ticking as it cooled. He reached Warehouse 7 and shoved the personnel door open. The cavernous space was quiet, lit by the steady hum of the overhead fluorescents. And there she was. Master Sergeant Vance stood beside a towering rack of shelves, a radio on a nearby crate, a clipboard in her left hand. With her right, the one that trembled, she was carefully placing a small inventory tag on a dusty box. She didn't seem to notice him at first. She was completely absorbed in her task, her focus absolute. She looked up only when his shadow fell over her. Her expression was neutral, her pale gray eyes calm. There was no sign of adrenaline, no hint of the life-and-death struggle she had just single-handedly directed. She looked like a clerk who had been interrupted while counting pencils. Madsen stopped a few feet away from her, his escort flanking him. He was breathing heavily from the walk and the shock. He looked from the unassuming woman to the simple radio, then back again. His entire worldview, his rigid understanding of strength and weakness, was fracturing. The woman he had dismissed as a liability, a piece of damaged equipment to be hidden away, had just saved his base. The mockery he felt in his office had curdled into a bewildering mix of disbelief and a deeply unsettling, grudging respect. "Master Sergeant Vance," he said, the name feeling foreign and inadequate on his tongue. "You have some explaining to do." She simply looked at him, her gaze steady. "I was securing the inventory, sir." Part 7, Second Test. The debriefing was a tense, surreal affair. The captured insurgents were professional, hard-bitten men, not local fanatics. They carried no identification, but they did carry a small, ruggedized data drive. It was their playbook, and it was locked behind a wall of military-grade encryption that made the base's cyber warfare team sweat. "The architecture is unlike anything I've ever seen, sir," a young captain explained to Colonel Madsen, his face pale under the harsh lighting of the Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, or SCIF. "It's not a brute force problem. The algorithm is adaptive. Every failed attempt at decryption reinforces the outer layers. We're literally making it stronger by trying to break it." They were on a clock. The initial, successful breach suggested a larger, coordinated operation was imminent. The data on that drive could be the key to preventing a catastrophe, but it was sealed in a digital vault designed by a genius. They had hours, maybe a day, before the intel became worthless. Madsen paced the floor, the pressure mounting. He was out of options. His experts were stumped. His career, his command, and the lives of countless personnel hung in the balance. And then his mind went back to Warehouse 7, to the calm voice on the radio, the impossible tactical awareness, and the heavily redacted file on his desk. He remembered a single, tantalizing phrase that had seemed irrelevant at the time, buried among the black bars: specialized proficiency in unconventional signals intelligence and cryptology. It was a long shot, a desperate, illogical leap of faith. But the logic of the past few hours had been turned on its head. He made a decision. "Get her," he said. Two airmen escorted Alara Vance into the SCF. She blinked in the sterile, white light, her dusty ABU uniform a stark contrast to the clean room environment. The cyber warfare team stared, confused. They saw the quiet logistics sergeant, the subject of base gossip. They had no idea why she was there. Madsen met her gaze. The condescension was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate urgency. "Master Sergeant," he said, his voice low, "your file mentions a background in signals intelligence. This drive, we can't open it. The captain here says it's impossible." He held out the small, black drive. "Can you do anything with this?" It wasn't an order. It was a plea. Vance took the drive. She didn't look at Madsen. Her full attention was on the object in her hand. She turned it over, her fingers tracing its hardened casing. She walked to the captain's terminal without a word, pulling a chair up to the console. The captain started to protest, but a sharp look from Madsen silenced him. Vance sat down, her posture perfect. She flexed her fingers. The tremor in her right hand was still there, a constant, quiet hum of nervous energy. But as her hands hovered over the keyboard, a strange stillness seemed to settle over them. Her fingers began to move, not with the frantic energy of the other techs, but with the deliberate, unhurried grace of a master musician. Lines of code filled the screen. She wasn't attacking the encryption. She wasn't running brute force algorithms. She was talking to it. She wrote small, elegant strings of code, probing the encryption's defenses, testing its responses, mapping its structure. It was a language only she and the code's creator understood. The room was utterly silent, save for the soft click-clack of the keys. The cyber warfare team watched, their initial skepticism melting into awe. She wasn't breaking a code. She was dismantling a bomb, wire by wire, with a surgeon's precision. Hours of their failed attempts were undone in minutes. She found a backdoor, a logical loophole so subtle and brilliant it was practically a signature. "He always liked paradoxes," she murmured, so softly Madsen almost missed it. "He builds his locks with a key hidden in the design." She typed a final command string. A progress bar appeared on the screen. "Decryption in progress, 1%. The test was no longer about her competence. It was about her identity. And everyone in the room knew they were about to discover who Master Sergeant Alara Vance really was. Part 8. Reveal. As the decryption percentage crawled slowly upward, a new kind of chaos erupted outside the SCF. A priority alert flashed across the command center consoles. A VIP transport, a C-32 carrying a high-level delegation, was being diverted to Al Dafra. Their original destination, a base 300 miles to the north, was now socked in by the same weather system that had battered them. Colonel Madsen was pulled from the SCAF to manage the unexpected arrival. "Who is it?" he snapped at his operations officer. The officer's eyes were wide. "It's Omega-1, sir. It's General Theron." A hush fell over the command center. General James Cerberus Theron, 4 stars, commander of all U.S. Special Operations Command, a living legend, a man who answered only to the Secretary of Defense and the President. His presence on any base was a monumental event. An unscheduled arrival in the middle of a post-attack cleanup was unheard of. "He's on the ground in 20 minutes, the officer added. "He's aware of our security situation. He wants a full, immediate briefing on the attack and the capture hostiles." Madsen's mind reeled. He had to brief a 4-star general, a man whose reputation was forged in the deadliest conflicts of the modern era, on how his quiet logistics base was nearly overrun, and how it was saved not by his command structure, but by a mystery sergeant in a dusty warehouse. 20 minutes later, General Theron swept into the command center like a force of nature. He was a tall, imposing man, his uniform bristling with qualifications, his face a granite mask carved by years of command. His aides and personal security detail fanned out, securing the room. "Madson's nept a salute. General Theron. Colonel Madsen, 380th YLRS. Welcome to Al-Dafra." Theron returned a perfunctory salute, his eyes already scanning the tactical displays. "Madsen, report. Give me the short version. I'm here for the prisoners." Madsen began, his voice tight, trying to project a confidence he did not feel. He outlined the storm, the breach, the attack on the drone hangar. Security forces responded, "Sir," but were disoriented by the storm. The defense was unconventional. It was coordinated remotely by an NCO from a secure position. Theron's eyebrow arched slightly. "An NCO?" "Yes, General. A master sergeant. She directed our forces, established a defensible perimeter, and effectively neutralized the threat. The same NCO is now in the SCF. She's breaking the encryption on a data drive recovered from the enemy leader." Madsen took a breath. "Her name is Master Sergeant Alara Vance." The name hit the room like a sonic boom. General Theron, a man famous for his unflappable composure, froze mid-stride. Every ounce of color drained from his face. The air crackled with a sudden, inexplicable tension. He slowly turned his head, his gaze boring into Madsen with an intensity that made the colonel feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Vance?" Theron's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "Did you say Alara Vance?" Yes, sir," Madsen stammered. Theron turned to his command sergeant major. "Find her. Now." Just then, the captain from the SCIF burst into the command center, his face flushed with victory. "Sir, she did it. The drive is open." He held up a printout. "My God, sir, it's a timetable. A coordinated multi-site attack. 3 Allied bases. It's scheduled for 0600 tomorrow." Theron snatched the paper, his eyes scanning it in an instant. The information Vance had uncovered had just averted a massacre. He looked up, his expression unreadable, and walked purposefully toward the SCIF entrance. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, leaving a room full of stunned, silent officers in his wake. Part 9. Respect. The air inside the SCIF was thick with the smell of ozone and spent adrenaline. Alara Vance sat before the terminal, her work complete. The raw data from the drive now flowed across the screen, a river of enemy call signs, target coordinates, and operational timelines. She had stared into the abyss of the enemy's plans and had not blinked. The effort had cost her. The exhaustion was a heavy weight on her shoulders, and the tremor in her right hand had returned with a vengeance, a constant, visible flutter. She was so focused, so deeply submerged in the after-action analysis, scrolling through her mind, that she didn't hear the door open. She only registered a presence when a large shadow fell over her. She looked up, her gray eyes clouded with fatigue, and saw him. General Theron. A lifetime of training, of ingrained discipline, took over. Her body moved before her mind could process the shock. She pushed her chair back and rose to her feet, coming to the rigid position of attention. Her eyes locked forward. Instinct drove her right arm up, her hand rising to her brow in a salute. The tremor was pronounced, undeniable. Her fingers quivered against her patrol cap, a testament to the storm she had weathered both outside and within. The handful of cyber warfare airmen in the room stiffened, watching the scene with a mixture of confusion and secondhand embarrassment. Colonel Madsen, who had followed the general to the doorway, held his breath. He saw the shaky hand, the gesture he had once privately scorned, and felt a profound sense of shame. General Theron did not return the salute. He stood motionless for a long second, his gaze fixed on her, but he wasn't looking at her hand. He was looking into her eyes, and his own expression was a complex tapestry of shock, relief, and a deep, bottomless well of respect. Then he moved. With emotion so sharp and sudden it seemed to crack the air, he snapped his own heels together. His back went ramrod straight. He brought his own hand up to his brow in a salute so crisp, so powerful, so imbued with meaning, that it felt like a physical force in the room. He snapped to attention for her. The general held the salute, his eyes locked on hers. His voice, when he spoke, was low, rough with an emotion he rarely showed. "It's good to see you, Wraith." The call sign fell into the sterile silence of the SCEF, and the world tilted on its axis. Wraith, a ghost, a legend whispered about in the dark corners of the Special Operations community. The architect of a dozen impossible victories, an operative whose file was said to be a black hole of state secrets. An asset so valuable, her existence was officially denied. Wraith, who was rumored to have been killed in action years ago in the Hindu Kush. The mockery Vance had endured for weeks, the whispers, the pitying looks, it all evaporated in an instant, incinerated by that single word. The airmen in the room stared, their mouths agape, as the truth crashed down upon them. Colonel Madsen felt a cold dread mix with a dawning, humbling awe. He hadn't been commanding a broken soldier. He had been commanding a myth, and he had sent her to count boxes. Part 10, Closure. General Theron held his salute, a rigid statue of deference, his eyes never leaving Vance's. The silent tableau stretched for an eternity, a transfer of unspoken history and shared sacrifice passing between them. Only when Alara slowly, deliberately, lowered her trembling hand did the general drop his own. He took a step forward, closing the small distance between them. He didn't offer a handshake, an empty gesture of military protocol. Instead, he gently took her right hand, the one that shook, the one that carried the physical scars of her past, in both of his. His grip was warm and firm, a shield against the tremors. "You've done enough, Alara," he said, his voice now a quiet murmur, meant only for her. "It's time to come home." A flicker of something, not a smile, but the memory of one, touched her eyes. A single, brief nod was her only reply. Outside the SCIF, the hubbub had passed completely. The sun, low on the horizon, broke through the clearing haze, bathing the base in a soft, golden light. It cast long shadows that stretched from the hangars and the command center, and from the lonely silhouette of Warehouse 7. The warehouse no longer looked like a tomb for forgotten parts. It looked like a fortress. Colonel Madsen stood in the doorway, a silent witness. He thought of the insultingly thin file on his desk, the black bars that had hidden not a weakness, but a strength he couldn't possibly comprehend. He had judged a book by its tattered cover, and, in doing so, had nearly misread the most important story of his life. The respect he now felt was profound, humbling, and permanent. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod to the empty space where she had stood, a salute of his own that no one else saw. The last image was of Vance walking beside the general, heading toward the waiting C-32. She wasn't in front of him or behind him, but perfectly beside him, and equal. Her posture was still rigid, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. The setting sun caught the fabric of her uniform, making her seem, for just a moment, to shimmer and fade into the light, every bit the ghost or call sign proclaimed her to be. Her shaky salute had been a question, a challenge to all who saw it. And in the end, it was a 4-star general who had provided the definitive answer. Strength is not the absence of scars. It is the courage to carry them with honor.